I'm Maria Rodriguez, 25, female. My life has always been guided by a simple principle. You take care of the people you love. As a nurse practitioner, I do it every day in a busy clinic. For the past 4 years, I did it in the quiet, sunlit rooms of my grandmother's house. My abuela Elena was my rock, my confidante, and the keeper of my childhood memories. My older brother, David, lived by a different code. He didn't care for people. He calculated their value. He saw our grandmother as a closing account, a final asset to be liquidated. I was about to learn just how far he would go to cash out, even if it meant destroying our family and her memory in the process. His greed was a sickness, and I, the nurse in the family, was about to be forced to administer a painful cure. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Abuela Elena's garden was her sanctuary. It was a chaotic masterpiece of climbing roses, stubborn tomato vines, and fragrant herbs she claimed could cure anything from a cough to a broken heart. It was in that garden, a year before she passed, that she made me a promise. I was on my knees, pulling weeds from her prized peony bed, the summer sun warm on my back. She sat in her favorite wicker chair, a hand-knitted blanket over her legs despite the heat. Her hands, gnarled with arthritis but still possessing a surprising strength, rested on the armrests. "Mija," she said, her voice a soft, papery rustle, "look at this house, look at this garden. It's more than wood and dirt, you know." I paused, looking up at her, my gloves covered in soil. She smiled, a gesture that still lit up her entire face. "This place has a soul. It remembers your first steps by the azaleas. It remembers your grandfather teaching you to catch fireflies by the oak tree. It remembers you, Maria." She had been a widow for 20 years, and the house was her companion. David, my brother, rarely visited. When he did, his eyes would scan the walls, the antique furniture, the half-acre of land. I knew he wasn't seeing memories, he was seeing dollar signs. He'd make slick comments about the property value, about what a modern condo could fetch. Abuela would just smile thinly and change the subject. "David loves things, not places." She continued, her gaze distant. "He doesn't understand that a home holds your heart. You do. You've held mine these last few years." It was true. After my nursing degree, I'd moved back to be with her. I managed her complex medication schedule, flushed her Roman 4 lines, cooked her meals, and most importantly, I listened. I listened to the same stories 100 times over, each telling as precious as the first. David would call once a week, a 2-minute high-speed conversation that always ended with him mentioning a hot stock tip, or a can't miss opportunity that just needed a little seed money. Abuela would always politely decline. She knew her son. That day in the garden, she reached out and put her hand on my shoulder. "This house, Maria, it's for you. It stays in the family with the heart of the family. I've made sure of it with Samuel Harding, my lawyer. It is my final wish. Promise me you'll keep the soul of this place alive." I promised. It was the easiest promise I'd ever made. When she passed away in her sleep, holding a faded photograph of my grandfather, the pain was immense, but it was matched by a fierce sense of duty. I would protect her home. I would protect her soul. I just never imagined the first attack would come from her own son. The funeral was a somber affair. David delivered a surprisingly eloquent eulogy about a mother he barely knew, his voice cracking with what I now recognize as performance art. His girlfriend, Tiffany, a woman with unnaturally white teeth and the predatory stillness of a lone shark, clung to his arm, dabbing at non-existent tears with a silk handkerchief. They were a perfect pair. Afterwards, relatives filled the house, their quiet condolences a comforting balm on my raw grief. David, however, was already in business mode. He cornered me in the kitchen while I was making coffee for our grieving tias. "We need to talk about the estate," he said, his voice low and urgent. "No lawyers, just family. Let's meet here tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Be ready to be practical." The coldness of his tone, the way he treated our grandmother's passing as a business inconvenience, made my stomach clench. But I agreed, hoping to get it over with. The next morning, I walked into the house to find David and Tiffany already at the kitchen table. They had a leather portfolio and 2 coffee cups from a fancy cafe. They hadn't bothered to make a fresh pot. The air of morning was gone, replaced by an atmosphere of hostile negotiation. "Morning," David said, not looking up from a document he was reading. "Let's get this done." He slid a sheaf of papers across the table. It was professionally bound with a cover sheet that read, "Addendum to the last will and testament of Elena Rodriguez." My blood ran cold. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "It's Abuela's final wish," David said smoothly. She had a change of heart last week. She realized I was the one with the business sense to manage an asset like this property. She decided to leave the house to me. Tiffany chimed in, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "She was so worried about you, Maria. She knew you wouldn't know what to do with all this. She signed this the day before she passed. As a loan officer, I see documents like this all the time. It's completely iron-clad." I stared at the last page. There was a shaky signature next to Abuela's name and an official-looking stamp and signature from a notary public I'd never heard of. It looked real. My mind was reeling. Could this be true? Had she changed her mind? Had I misunderstood everything? David seemed to sense my confusion and pressed his advantage. "It's a shock, I know," he said, pushing another paper towards me. "This is just a form acknowledging the addendum. Sign it, and we can avoid probate court. I'll even give you a cut once I sell the place, a big one, just to show there are no hard feelings." The word sell was a slap in the face. He wasn't just taking the house, he was erasing it. He was a vulture, and he was trying to convince me to help him pick the bones. I couldn't breathe. The kitchen, once a place of warmth and the smell of baking bread, felt like a sterile interrogation room. My promise to Abuela echoed in my ears, a stark contrast to the cold, legalistic words on the paper in front of me. "Sell it." I finally managed to say, the words catching in my throat. David sighed, a gust of performative frustration. "Maria, be realistic. This is a $500,000 property. It's an asset, not a museum. You work as a nurse. What are you going to do with it? Let it fall apart. I can leverage it, invest, create real wealth." It's what she would have wanted. Every word he spoke felt like a lie. The Abuela he described, a cold, calculating investor, was a stranger to me. My Abuela was a woman who saved seeds in glass jars and believed a house had a soul. "I'm not signing this," I said, my voice gaining a sliver of strength. "Not until I talk to Mr. Harding." David's face, so carefully composed in a mask of reason, twitched with anger. "Harding, he's a scene. I'll old man. He doesn't know anything about this. This is her final wish. Are you going to defy her dying wish?" Tiffany placed a perfectly manicured hand on his arm. "David, calm down. Maria's just emotional. She needs a moment." Her condescending tone was even more infuriating than his anger. I took the papers and stood up, my legs shaking. "I'm taking these with me," I declared, and before either of them could react, I walked out of the house, leaving them sitting in stunned silence at the kitchen table. That night, I couldn't sleep. I spread the forged documents on my small apartment floor, the clinical black, and white text a stark insult to my grandmother's vibrant life. I felt lost, adrift in a sea of doubt. Was David right? Had I been so blind? To ground myself, I pulled out a large, wooden box where I kept all of Abuela's letters and cards, a lifetime of correspondence. I needed to see her handwriting, to feel connected to her again. I laid out dozens of cards, from my 5th birthday to my nursing school graduation. Her script was a thing of beauty, a flowing, confident cursive from an era when handwriting was an art form. I looked at the signature on a card from the previous Christmas, Con Amor, Abuela Elena. Then I looked at the signature on David's document. The forgery was good, I had to admit. It mimicked the general shape and slant, but the closer I looked, the more the flaws screamed at me. Abuela's signature, even when weakened by age, had a life to it, a fluid, practiced grace. The signature on the document was stiff, drawn rather than written. The pressure of the pen was all wrong, heavy and uniform, as if someone had been carefully tracing an outline, and then I saw the fatal error. The L in Elena, Abuela always made hers with a tall, proud loop that leaned slightly to the right. The L on the document was a rigid, vertical line. It was a small detail, but it was as definitive as a fingerprint. It wasn't a signature. It was a crude impersonation. That trembling, lifeless line wasn't the mark of a dying woman. It was the mark of a liar. The discovery of the flawed signature was like a switch flipping in my brain. The fog of grief and confusion evaporated, replaced by cold, sharp clarity. The next morning, I was on the phone with Mr. Samuel Harding. I had been worried by David's comment about him being senile, but the voice on the other end of the line was anything but. It was deep, measured, and radiated an old-school authority. "Maria, my dear," he said, his voice full of warmth, "I was so sorry to hear about Alina. She was one of my favorite clients, one of my favorite people, of course. Come in immediately." I sat in his office, which smelled of old books and lemon polish, and laid out the story and the documents. He put on a pair of gold-rimmed reading glasses and studied the addendum for a long time, his face unreadable. He held it up to the light, then brought it close to his eyes, examining the notary seal. Finally, he took off his glasses and looked at me. "Alina called me 3 days before she passed," he said softly. "She could barely speak, but she made her nurse call me. She wanted to confirm that the original will was secure and that nothing had been changed. She told me, Samuel, protect Maria from the wolves. It seems a wolf has gotten past the gate, Mr. Harding worked with a quiet, relentless efficiency. He first made a call to a private investigator he trusted, a former police detective. "I want to know everything about David Rodriguez and his girlfriend, Tiffany Cole," he instructed. "Finances, professional standing, the works, and next." "Finances, professional standing, the works, and next." He sent a high-resolution scan of the signature to a forensic document examiner he'd used for decades. While we waited for the reports, Mr. Harding focused on the notary. "A notary's logbook is a public record," he explained. He filed a request, and what we found was staggering. The notary listed on the document, a man named Philip Barlow, had his commission expire 2 years prior. More importantly, his logbook for the date in question showed he was notarizing documents for a real estate firm across town at the exact time he supposedly witnessed my grandmother's signature. The seal was either stolen or, more likely, a fake. Within a week, the rest of the pieces fell into place with devastating precision. The handwriting expert's report came back, a clumsy simulation, with clear evidence of tracing. The PI report was even more damning. David was in catastrophic financial trouble. He had lost over $200,000 in high-risk cryptocurrency trades and was being pursued by aggressive creditors. He wasn't just broke, he was on the verge of total ruin. And Tiffany, she wasn't just a loan officer. She had recently been fired from her job for falsifying client information to approve bad loans, and she was under internal investigation by the bank. They weren't just trying to get a house, they were trying to pull off a desperate last-ditch heist to save themselves from a financial abyss of their own making. They hadn't just lied to me, their entire lives were a web of deceit, and I had just been given the map to unravel it all. With a mountain of evidence in our hands, Mr. Harding sat me down in his office. "We can go to the police right now, Maria," he said, his steepled fingers resting on his chin. "Forgery, fraud, these are serious criminal offenses. They would likely face jail time." I thought about it for a long moment. Part of me, the angry, betrayed part, wanted to see David behind bars. But another part of me knew that a public, messy criminal trial would tarnish my grandmother's memory. It would become a sordid local news story, her name dragged through the mud of her son's greed. "Is there another way?" I asked, "a way to get the house, to enforce her real will, and to make sure he faces a consequence that is more personal, Mr. Harding smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "Ah," he said, "you are Alina's granddaughter, after all. She believed in justice, not just punishment, and yes, there is another way, a much more elegant way." He opened a thick file on his desk. It was my grandmother's official will, the original copy, its pages crisp and the ink bold. He turned to the last section. Alina was a very sharp woman. She knew her son's character, which is why she had me include this. He pointed to a paragraph titled In Terrorem Clause. "It's a legal provision, often called a no-contest clause." Mr. Harding explained it to me in simple terms. The clause stated that if any beneficiary of the will directly or indirectly challenged its provisions, or attempted to use fraud or undue influence to invalidate or replace the will, that person would be automatically disinherited entirely. Their share would be forfeited and absorbed into the remainder of the estate. The will stipulated that David was to receive a cash inheritance of $75,000. It was Abuela's final, hopeful attempt to give him a fresh start. But with this clause, her hope had become a trap. By creating a fraudulent document to try and get more, David had unknowingly set himself up to lose everything. The beauty of this, Mr. Harding explained, is that it's a civil matter handled by the estate. We don't need a criminal court. We simply enforce the terms of the will. We present our evidence of his fraud, and the clause is triggered. He loses the house he never had, and he loses the money he was supposed to get. The plan was perfect. It was a form of justice Abuela herself would have appreciated. Clean, logical, and inescapable. It used David's own greed as the weapon of his downfall. We would call a formal meeting for the reading of the will. David and Tiffany would walk in expecting to claim their prize. They would be walking into a perfectly laid trap, sprung by the pen that had signed the truth years ago. We scheduled the meeting in the largest conference room at Mr. Harding's law firm. It was an intimidating space, all dark wood and towering bookshelves, with a long, polished table that felt as final as a judge's bench. I arrived early with Mr. Harding, and we laid out our files on one side of the table, the expert reports, the financial documents, the sworn affidavits. Each one felt like a stone being placed on a scale of justice. I was nervous, my heart hammering against my ribs, but looking at Mr. Harding's calm, steady demeanor gave me strength. David and Tiffany arrived precisely on time. They radiated an aura of smug victory. David wore an expensive-looking suit I knew he couldn't afford, and Tiffany had a triumphant smirk plastered on her face. They clearly believed my silence over the past few weeks was a sign of surrender. "Samuel," David said with false familiarity as he sat down, "good to see you're still kicking. Let's make this quick. I have a closing to get to." Tiffany sat beside him, her portfolio clicking open with an air of finality. Mr. Harding began without preamble. "We are here to read the final will of Elena Rodriguez. However, an ancillary matter has arisen that must be settled first." He gestured to the forged addendum, which lay in the center of the table. "Mr. Rodriguez, you presented this document to your sister, claiming it represents your mother's final wishes." David nodded. "That's right. She signed it right before she passed." Mr. Harding slid a glossy, bound report across the table. "This is the report from a court, certified forensic document examiner. His conclusion, and I quote, is that the signature is a non-genuine, simulated forgery. He found evidence of tracing." David's confident expression faltered. He paled slightly. "That's absurd. He's probably one of your cronies." Mr. Harding ignored him and slid another file across the table. "This is a sworn affidavit from the notary, Mr. Philip Barlow, whose seal appears on your document. He states under penalty of perjury that he was not present, that he has never met your mother, and that his notary seal was stolen from his office 3 years ago. He is cooperating fully with the investigation." Tiffany let out a small, strangled gasp. Her carefully constructed composure was shattering. "Furthermore, Mr. Harding continued, his voice like ice, "We have financial records indicating you, David, are in over $200,000 of debt, and you, Tiffany, are under investigation for bank fraud. This document was not an act of love, it was an act of profound desperation." David finally snapped. "This is an ambush. You can't prove anything." "Oh, but I don't have to," Mr. Harding said, finally picking up the true will. "Your mother will do it for me." He then read the will in its entirety, the house to me, personal items to cousins, and a cash sum of $75,000 to David. Then he read the interim clause, his voice booming in the silent room. He explained in clear, simple terms that David's act of fraud had triggered the clause. "As of this moment, David, under the legal terms set forth by your own mother, you are disinherited. You receive nothing." The silence that followed was absolute. David stared, his mouth agape, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. Tiffany was openly weeping. They hadn't just lost. They had been systematically, legally, and completely dismantled. The aftermath of the meeting was swift and brutal. David exploded in a torrent of impotent rage, accusing Mr. Harding of conspiracy and me of manipulation, but his threats were hollow. The evidence was irrefutable. Security escorted him from the building, his expensive suit looking cheap and ill-fitting in the harsh light of his defeat. He and Tiffany were finished. The bank's internal investigation into her activities quickly became a criminal one, especially after Mr. Harding's office submitted evidence of her involvement in the inheritance fraud. She faced serious charges, her career and reputation destroyed in a single afternoon. David's creditors, who had likely been promised a windfall from the sale of the house, closed in. With no inheritance and no assets, he was forced into bankruptcy. He had to sell his car, move out of his flashy apartment, and his life as a high-flying trader was over. The last I heard, he was working a minimum-wage job, a shadow of the arrogant man who had tried to steal my home. He had gambled everything on one last despicable act of greed and lost in the most absolute way possible. He had not only been defeated, he had been erased from our grandmother's legacy by her own hand. For me, the victory was quiet and bittersweet. There was no joy in my brother's ruin, only a profound sadness for the person he could have been. The legal process of transferring the house into my name was smooth. Walking through the front door with the keys in my hand, knowing it was truly mine, was a moment of overwhelming emotion. The house no longer felt like a place of conflict. It felt like a sanctuary again. I spent weeks cleaning it out, not throwing away memories but curating them. I kept her favorite wicker chair, her recipe books, and the countless photos. I replanted the garden, my hands in the same soil she had tended for 50 years. I didn't sell it. I never would. I live there now. Sometimes, when I'm sitting in the garden at dusk, watching the fireflies begin to glow by the old oak tree, I can almost feel her presence. The house's soul is safe. I had kept my promise. The echoes of the confrontation have faded, replaced by the peaceful rhythm of a life lived in a place where love, not money, is the most valuable inheritance. My grandmother's final wish wasn't just about a piece of property. It was about protecting a way of life, a belief that some things are too sacred to have a price tag. And in the end, that was the legacy that truly mattered.